Hi, this is the third of a series of 5 short films, and this film is aimed at people who are making an application for either Associate Fellow or Fellow. And this film will take you through the process of actually writing your application form and give you some tips and hints as to how you can do this effectively.
This presentation is aimed at looking at how you would go about writing an Associate Fellow or Fellow application. So, firstly, before you actually get to the stage of completing your application, you need to have listened to the podcasts on what is the UK PSF, which will give you that basic understanding of the UK Professional Standards Framework and the dimensions of practice that you're going to be engaging with within your application. And then secondly, the podcast around what level of fellowship you should be applying for. It's vital before you start your application that you have a clear understanding of the dimensions of practice that are pertinent to the level of Associate Fellow or Fellow. This is important because your whole application is going to focus around you demonstrating the engagement with these dimensions. Okay, let's have a look at the dimensions of practice in more detail. Let's look for the Associate Fellow first. So an Associate Fellow needs to demonstrate engagement with at least 2 of these areas of activity. They then need to integrate within their application appropriate levels of core knowledge and appropriate professional values. In some cases, this may not include all of the core knowledge and professional values, but in the majority of applications it does. For the Fellow, they need to demonstrate engagement with all the dimensions of practice. So that's all 5 areas of activity, all 5 areas of core knowledge, and the 4 professional values. Let's remind ourselves of the difference between Associate Fellow and Fellow. So the Associate Fellow will have a role in the support of teaching and learning. They will be able to focus on at least 2 of the areas of activity and evidence core knowledge associated with the chosen areas and a commitment to the appropriate professional values. Unlike the Fellow, who will have a substantive teaching role, together with a supporting learning role, and will be able to demonstrate engagement with all of the dimensions. So let's look at the application process. The first stage of the application, whether you've chosen to apply through a written application or a presentation, is to complete the experience grid. And within this grid, you break down your areas of activity within your actual job role. You then cross-reference them with the dimensions of practice, and you then add a date to demonstrate the currency of this practice. So if we take a look at the top example here, you may have been involved in redesigning the VLE course area for a unit you're involved in teaching. This cross-references with AA1, AA4, K1, 2 and 4 and V1 and 3, and this was completed in August 2012. You can continue breaking down your role into smaller examples of professional activities and cross-referencing them as you're going through. You need to, within the grid, to demonstrate engagement with all the required dimensions of practice, and I would suggest you do this at least twice, if not more. And ensure that you are showing currency of practice by showing that majority of these activities have been completed within the last 3 years of your practice. Once you have completed your grid, you will then select key examples from the grid to take forward into your written application and to look at in more detail. you're not going to have space in your application to look at all these examples in detail. Right, so the next part is to demonstrate your professional activities. This part can be done through a written application or a presentation. You're going to demonstrate engagement with the required dimensions, and you're going to ensure again that you cover all the dimensions within this section of the application. There are 3 key requirements of this discussion. Firstly is to demonstrate currency. So to demonstrate that you are currently or have within the last 3 years engaged with the required dimensions of practice. You need to demonstrate sufficiency, that is, that you have done your activities more than once and you can demonstrate a sustained engagement with the required dimensions. And then finally, you need to provide evidence of impact. In other words, you have to prove that what you have done has had an impact on the student's learning experience. We recommend that you can use this reflective cycle to demonstrate your engagement. So for a fellow who's completing the 5 sections of the application form based on each of the areas of activity, you can use this cycle for each of your activities. So the first phase is to clearly describe the activity. What have you been doing? This needs to be succinct, but to give the reader a clear description of the activity you've been involved with. The next section is to discuss how you actually perform this activity. And the key part of this is not just to describe how you perform an activity, but why you've chosen to do it in that way. This section provides the opportunity for you to link your discussion to the underpinning theory of your teaching and learning and assessment philosophy and your values. We do expect at this stage for them to be some reference to underpinning pedagogical theory, and here you might want to cite the appropriate authors. The final stage is to evaluate the effect of your activity to prove the impact on the student and on the teaching and learning experience for that student. This proof could take the form of feedback from students. It could be feedback from colleagues, feedback from external examiners. So you can include direct quotes from these stakeholders within your application. It might be through providing examples of ISS feedback or NSS feedback. It might be through providing NSS scores. It might be through evaluating the outcomes in terms of assessment outcomes for units you're involved in teaching. It's a key part of the application, and it is something that you need to, and you may need to search through your emails, etc., to find this evidence. Here I've provided an example from an application of this process. So here we can see highlighted in blue the actual description of the activity. So here we've got a description of formative feedback using quizzes within tutorials. The next section in the orange demonstrates the reasons underpinning this approach and why the tutor decided to carry out this approach. Then in the purple here we've got some link to evidence and a link to some underpinning research that has shown that this method of teaching works. And then finally the applicant has carried out some statistical analysis to prove that this approach has had a positive impact on the final grade of the students as well as having some secondary impacts that would be useful for the students and demonstrates a quality of experience. And then finally, in brackets here, we've got some cross-referencing to the dimensions of practice, and this is something I'd advise you all to do within your applications. Okay, part 3 of your reference will be to provide 2 references from colleagues. The first thing about your referee when you're thinking about who you might approach is they have to have first-hand experience of your current role. They need to know your practice, they need to be able to validate the evidence you're providing within your application, both within your experience grid and your reflective commentary. Finally, they need to be familiar with the UK PSF and the requirements for associate fellowship or fellowship, because they have to demonstrate this within their application. We would strongly recommend that your current line manager is one of your referees, and then it's up to you to choose a suitable colleague to provide the rest of the reference. So, thinking about the support you can gain with your application. The first thing we would ask you to do is to complete an expression of interest form, which can be found on the PSF webpage. The link's here for you, and on the webpage you can find a lot of resources to support you in developing your application. There is also a downloadable handbook on the scheme that gives you lots of tips and hints about pulling together your application. We provide drop-ins where you can book a half-hour session with a tutor. There are writing retreats where you can come for a whole day, get away from your desk and actually have a go at writing your application with the support of a CELT tutor. And we will also read drafts of your application, and you can email these to the PSF email at psf@mmu.ac.uk. So good luck with your applications, and I hope you found this podcast useful.